What if the oldest prophecy ever written was not a myth? What if it was a warning left by those who witnessed the last time it happened? In the deserts of southern Iraq, where the sun turns sand to glass and the wind carries dust that might once have been temples, there lie fragments of clay that whisper secrets 5,000 years old. Beneath collapsed ziggurats and buried cities, beneath layers of time and conquest and flood, the Sumerians left a message, not carved in stone that weathers and cracks, but pressed into wet clay, baked hard by fire, preserved by accident and catastrophe, waiting for someone to read them. The tablets are small, no larger than a paperback book, covered in wedge-shaped marks that look like bird tracks pressed into mud. Cuneiform, they call it. The oldest form of writing we have ever found. And when scholars finally learned to read these marks, when they pieced together the language that had been dead for 2,000 years, they discovered something that should not exist. The Sumerians knew things they had no right to know. They described the solar system with planets they could not see. They mapped the movements of bodies that would not be discovered for another 4,000 years. They wrote about a world beyond the stars. A planet with an orbit so vast it vanishes into the dark for millennia before returning again. They called it Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, and they said it returns every 3,600 years. When it comes close, they wrote, the heavens tremble, the earth shakes, the waters rise. And those who came from that world, the Anunnaki, descend once more. For over a century, scholars dismissed this as mythology, religious allegory, ancient people trying to explain the cosmos with stories of gods and monsters. But the details are too specific, too precise, the mathematics too sophisticated, the astronomy too accurate, and the warning carved into tablet after tablet too consistent. They were not telling a story. They were recording an event, something they witnessed. Something their ancestors survived. Something they believed would happen again. Before we descend deeper into the ruins, before we trace the fingerprints of the scribes who pressed these warnings into clay, take a moment. If you are drawn to mysteries where ancient myth meets modern science, where the line between prophecy and evidence blurs, consider subscribing to this channel. Press the like button if you feel that pull, that sense that history is longer and stranger than we were taught. And if you are still here, if you are listening in the dark somewhere, drifting toward sleep or driving through the night or simply sitting quietly with these questions, leave a comment. Tell me where you are in the world right now, what hour you are keeping. Whether you believe this is real or simply the most compelling myth ever written. Do you believe Nibiru exists? Type 1 if you believe it is real. Type 2 if you believe it is myth. I want to know. I want to picture this story reaching across time zones and continents, carried into bedrooms and headphones, whispered into the quiet moments when the world slows down and old questions rise again. Because this is not a new question. It is the oldest question humanity ever asked. Where did we come from? Who taught us to write and measure and map the stars? And are those who came before still watching, still waiting, still returning in cycles we have forgotten how to see? The Sumerians did not invent civilization. They appeared with it. Around 3,500 years before the Common Era, in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, cities rose where there had been only villages. Not gradually, not over centuries of slow development, but suddenly. As if someone flipped a switch and humanity went from scattered tribes to organized states in the span of a few generations. They had writing. Not pictographs scratching out simple ideas, but a fully formed system capable of expressing law, poetry, philosophy, and mathematics. They had the wheel, irrigation canals engineered with precision, monumental architecture, a base 60 number system so elegant we still use it to measure time and angles. A calendar that tracked the movements of planets they should not have been able to see. Archaeologists call this the Sumerian problem. The sudden appearance of sophistication with no clear developmental stages. Other civilizations left breadcrumbs. You can trace Egyptian hieroglyphics back through simpler forms. You can watch Chinese characters evolve from oracle bones, but Sumerian cuneiform appears complete, already capable, already recording complex ideas. And among those ideas, buried in thousands of tablets excavated from the ruins of Ur and Uruk and Nineveh, is a cosmology that should not exist, a description of the heavens that includes planets invisible to the naked eye. A story of creation that reads less like religion and more like science written in the only language available. They described the solar system as containing 12 bodies. The sun, the moon, and 10 planets, not the 6 visible to ancient sky watchers. 10. They knew about Uranus and Neptune, worlds that would not be discovered again until the 18th and 19th centuries. They knew Earth was round and orbited the Sun 2,000 years before Copernicus. And they described a 12th body, a planet they called Nibiru, large, distant, with an orbit so elongated that it spends most of its time in the frozen dark beyond Pluto and only briefly swings through the inner solar system. They said this planet was the home of the Anunnaki, beings who descended when Nibiru drew near and departed when it moved away. And they said the cycle repeated every shar. Every 3,600 years, 3,600, not a random number, a multiple of 60, the foundation of their entire mathematical system, a unit of cosmic time encoded into their astronomy, their architecture, their kingship, their myths. They measured everything in shars. And when they looked back into their history, into the ages before the flood, they counted time in multiples of 3,600 years. How did they know? How did a Bronze Age civilization without telescopes or satellites describe the outer solar system with accuracy that would not be matched for 4,000 years? The standard answer is they did not. That scholars misinterpreted the texts. That Nibiru is a metaphor or a misidentified planet like Jupiter. But there is another possibility. One that the Sumerians themselves recorded, that the knowledge was given, that the Anunnaki, whoever or whatever they were, taught them, that what we are reading is not imagination but documentation, the testimony of a people trying to preserve what they had been told, trying to warn future generations, trying to pass down the memory of what happens when Nibiru returns. In 1976, a researcher named Zecharia Sitchin published a book that would ignite decades of debate, The 12th Planet. Sitchin was not an archaeologist. He was a scholar of ancient languages, fluent in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Hebrew. He had spent years translating the tablets, and he came to a conclusion that mainstream academia rejected immediately. He believed the Sumerians were not speaking metaphorically, that Nibiru was a real planet, that the Anunnaki were not gods but extraterrestrial visitors, that they came to Earth 450,000 years ago, genetically engineered modern humans, and left behind the knowledge that would seed every ancient civilization. His translations were controversial, his methods questioned, his conclusions dismissed as pseudoscience, but his work did something no academic paper could. It made people ask the question again, what if the myths are true, not symbolically, literally? What if the Sumerians were trying to tell us something we refuse to hear because it did not fit the timeline we had decided was correct? And then, 40 years after Sitchin published his first book, astronomers at the California Institute of Technology announced a discovery that stunned the scientific world. Evidence of a massive undiscovered planet at the edge of the solar system, not where Sitchin said Nibiru should be, not with the same orbit, but the same principle, a large hidden world shaping the outer solar system from the dark, a world we never saw because we were not looking in the right place. They called it Planet 9, and suddenly the idea of hidden planets did not sound so absurd anymore. Suddenly the Sumerians describing a world beyond the visible sky did not seem so impossible. Suddenly, the question was not whether hidden planets could exist. The question was whether one of them is coming back. The Sumerian tablets do not describe Nibiru as a distant abstraction. They describe it as a force, a presence that returns in cycles, and with each return the world changes. Floods sweep across the land, mountains rise, civilizations fall, and then when the crisis passes, when Nibiru moves back into the dark, humanity rebuilds, starting over, carrying fragments of what was lost. The last time, according to their records, was around 1600 years before the Common Era, a time when Bronze Age civilizations across the Mediterranean collapsed, when Thera erupted with the force of 1,000 nuclear bombs, when Egypt was struck by plagues, when cities burned and empires fell, a time the archaeological record marks as a sudden catastrophic transition. Before that, 3,600 years earlier, around 5,200 years before the Common Era, the Sumerians themselves emerged, not from scattered farming villages, but as a civilization already formed, already literate, already advanced, as if someone had arrived and taught them everything at once. Before that, 3,600 years earlier still, the last ice age ended, not gradually, suddenly. The younger Dryas, a 1,000-year return to glacial cold, terminated in less than a decade. Temperatures soared, ice melted, sea levels rose, and agriculture appeared in multiple places at once. As if humanity, traumatized by near extinction, was given the tools to survive. And before that, 3,600 years before the younger Dryas ended, it began, 12,800 years ago, when something struck the Earth with enough force to ignite continental wildfires, trigger a climate collapse, and drive dozens of species to extinction. When the world of the Ice Age megafauna ended and the world of human civilization began. 4 moments, separated by 3,600 years. 4 transitions when the world ended and began again. 4 points in time when the archaeological and geological record shows sudden catastrophic change followed by renewal. 4 moments that match the cycle the Sumerians carved into clay and called the return of Nibiru. Coincidence, pattern, warning. The tablets sit in museums now, behind glass, labeled and catalogued. The wedge-shaped marks still sharp after 5 millennia. And if you look closely at some of them, if the light is right, you can still see them. Fingerprints, the thumbprints and palm prints of the scribes who pressed these warnings into wet clay before it dried forever. Those hands belonged to people who believed what they were writing mattered, who believed the knowledge was too important to lose, who understood that civilizations fall and languages die and only the clay endures. They were not writing mythology, they were writing testimony. The last testimony of those who survived the previous return, the ones who knew what was coming and wanted us to be ready. The warning is simple. The heavens move in cycles. The planets return, and with them the forces that shape the world. Catastrophe is not random. It is rhythmic, predictable. Written in the movements of bodies so distant we cannot see them until they are already here. Whether Nibiru is a literal planet or a symbol for cosmic forces we do not yet understand, the pattern is undeniable. The Earth has been destroyed before. Life has been reset. Civilizations have collapsed and rebuilt, and the survivors every time left the same message carved in stone and pressed in clay and encoded in myth. This has happened before. It will happen again. And those who came from the stars will return when the cycle completes. The wind moves across the ruins of across the ziggurat platforms where priests once watched the sky, across the buried libraries where tablets wait in darkness. And in that wind, if you listen carefully, you can hear what the Sumerians were trying to tell us. The warning was never about the end. It was about the return, about what comes after, about the knowledge we must preserve if we are to survive the next turning of the wheel, about the Anunnaki, about Nibiru, about the 3,600-year cycle that governs more than we know. And as the stars wheel overhead as they have for millennia, as they will for millennia more, the question remains. Not whether the cycle is real, but whether we are ready for what happens when it completes. The Sumerians left us the answer, buried, waiting, pressed into clay by hands that knew time. The clay tablets do not look like much at first glance. Small, brown, covered in scratches that resemble nothing so much as the tracks of birds walking across wet mud. You could hold one in your hand, feel its weight, run your fingers across the surface where the reed stylus pressed into clay 5,000 years ago, and you would be touching the oldest written words in human history. In the spring of 1845, a young British archaeologist named Austin Henry Layard arrived in northern Iraq with permission from the Ottoman Empire to dig. He had heard stories. Legends of ancient cities buried beneath mounds locals called tells. Hills that were not natural but the compressed remains of civilizations that had risen and fallen and been forgotten. He chose a site near the modern city of Mosul, a massive mound the locals called Kyanjik. Ancient texts mentioned a city here, Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire, one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Layard believed it was buried beneath that hill, and he was right. Within weeks his workers uncovered walls, then palaces, then libraries, rooms filled floor to ceiling with clay tablets, tens of thousands of them, carefully organized, catalogued by ancient librarians, preserved by the fire that destroyed the city. The same flames that consumed the wooden shelves baked the clay tablets harder than pottery, turning them into ceramic, making them nearly indestructible. Layard shipped crates of tablets back to the British Museum in London. He had no idea what they said. No one did. The script was unreadable, a dead language from a dead civilization. But scholars knew it was important. These were the oldest written documents ever found, older than anything in Greece or Rome, older than the Hebrew Bible, possibly older than anything else in existence. It took decades to crack the code. Linguists compared the script to other ancient languages. They found bilingual inscriptions, stone carvings that showed the same text in multiple scripts. Slowly, letter by letter, word by word, they began to understand. The script was called cuneiform. The language was Akkadian, and beneath Akkadian lay an even older tongue, Sumerian, the first written language on Earth. By the 1870s, scholars could read the tablets, and what they read shook the foundations of biblical archaeology. One tablet, translated by George Smith in 1872, told the story of a great flood. A man warned by the gods to build a boat, animals taken aboard, waters covering the earth, the boat coming to rest on a mountain, the man sending out birds to find dry land. It was the story of Noah, but it was not from the Bible. It was from a Babylonian epic called the Atrahasis, and it was older than Genesis by over 1,000 years. The implications were staggering. The Bible, which scholars had assumed was the original source, was actually copying from earlier texts. The flood story was not Hebrew, it was Sumerian, and the Sumerians had written it first. As more tablets were translated, more connections emerged. The creation story, the Garden of Paradise, the tower reaching to heaven. The confusion of languages. All of these appeared in Sumerian texts centuries before they appeared in the Hebrew scriptures. The Bible was not recording original history. It was preserving older stories, stories that came from Mesopotamia, stories written in cuneiform by people who claimed they were recording what the gods had told them. But the tablets did not just contain myths. They contained something far stranger, detailed descriptions of the cosmos, lists of celestial bodies, astronomical observations spanning centuries, mathematical calculations for planetary orbits, and again references to a world called Nibiru. The word appears in multiple contexts. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic copied from older Sumerian sources, Nibiru is associated with Marduk, the chief god, the one who brings order from chaos. The text describes Nibiru as a celestial body that crosses the heavens, that governs the movements of other planets, that establishes the paths of the stars. Mainstream scholars interpreted this symbolically. Nibiru, they said, was not a planet but a point, the crossing of the ecliptic and the celestial equator, the place where the sun crosses during the equinox, or perhaps Jupiter, the largest visible planet. A symbol of divine kingship and cosmic order, but the descriptions do not fit. The texts describe Nibiru as having a path, an orbit, a journey that takes it far from the other gods, far from the visible sky into the deep waters of space. And then, after a long absence, it returns, blazing, visible, crossing between the realms, bringing change. The Sumerians were obsessed with the number 60. Their entire mathematical system was built on it. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. We inherited this from them. We still use it every time we check a clock or measure an angle, but we forgot why. 60 is not arbitrary. It is the most divisible small number. You can split 60 evenly by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This makes it extraordinarily useful for trade, construction, and astronomy. The Sumerians understood this, and they extended the principle into cosmic time. 60 times 60 equals 3,600. This number they called a shar, a complete cycle, a great year. And they measured everything in shars, the ages of the world, the reigns of the gods, the intervals between catastrophes. 3,600 was not just a unit of time, it was the rhythm of the cosmos, the beat to which the heavens moved. In the Sumerian king list, a document that records every ruler of Mesopotamia from the beginning of kingship to the historical period, the pre-flood kings are listed with reigns that span tens of thousands of years. Ululim, the first king of Eridu, reigned for 28,800 years. Alalgar reigned for 36,000 years. These numbers seem absurd, impossible. No human lives that long, but the numbers are not random. They are multiples of 3,600. 28,800 is 8 shars. 36,000 is 10 shars. The Sumerians were not claiming these kings lived for impossible lengths. They were encoding astronomical cycles, measuring time not in human lifetimes but in cosmic intervals, in the orbital periods of bodies that return every 3,600 years. And then the king list reaches a breaking point. a line that divides history into before and after. The flood swept over. When kingship was lowered from heaven again, kingship was in Kish. After the flood, the reigns become shorter, more human, a few hundred years, then a few decades, then historical lengths we can verify. The flood marks the transition from cosmic time to human time, from the age when the gods ruled directly to the age when humans ruled in their name. But the flood is not described as myth, it is described as event, a moment when the world ended, when water covered everything, when only a few survived, and when the waters receded, kingship descended from heaven again. The same phrase used before the flood, as if what had been lost was being restored, as if the gods or the Anunnaki returned after the catastrophe to help humanity rebuild. This is where the tablets become most specific and most controversial. Because they do not just say the gods came down, they say where the gods came from. They came from Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, the 12th body in the solar system, the world that orbits far beyond the visible planets and returns every 3,600 years. The Enuma Elish describes the creation of the solar system in language that sounds disturbingly modern. It speaks of Tiamat, a watery world, colliding with Marduk, a wandering planet. The collision splits Tiamat in two. Half becomes the asteroid belt, half becomes Earth knocked into a new orbit. Marduk the victor continues on its elliptical path, becoming Nibiru, the planet that crosses the heavens and returns. For decades, scholars dismissed this as poetic creation mythology. The ancients trying to explain the universe through stories of battling gods. But in the 1970s, Zecharia Sitchin proposed a radical reinterpretation. He argued that the Sumerians were not writing poetry, they were writing astronomy, that Tiamat was a real planet. That Marduk was a rogue planet captured by the sun's gravity, that the collision actually happened, and that Nibiru, the planet that survived, still orbits the sun on a vast elliptical path. Sitchin was not a scientist, he was a linguist and historian, but he read the texts carefully. He compared them to modern planetary formation theories, and he found parallels: the late heavy bombardment, the formation of Earth's moon, the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. All of these, he argued, could be explained by a catastrophic collision billions of years ago. A collision the Sumerians somehow knew about. His critics pointed out the problems immediately. The texts are mythology, not science. The language is symbolic, not literal. Nibiru, if it existed, would destabilize the orbits of other planets. There is no evidence of such a body, no gravitational anomalies, no unexplained perturbations in planetary motion. The idea was dismissed as fringe, pseudoscience, a misreading of ancient texts by someone who wanted them to say something they did not. But Sitchin's work resonated with millions of readers, not because it was scientifically rigorous, but because it asked a question mainstream archaeology refused to consider. What if the ancients knew more than we think? What if their stories are not primitive attempts to explain thunder and rain, but sophisticated attempts to preserve knowledge they were given? Knowledge too advanced for their time. Knowledge passed down from those who came before. The tablets describe the Anunnaki with remarkable consistency, not as abstract divine forces but as specific individuals. Anu, the king of the gods, Enlil, the commander of earth, Enki, the scientist and benefactor of humanity, Ninmah, the medical officer, Inanna, the warrior, Udu, the pilot, Nanar, the administrator, 50 major gods, 300 minor gods, all with names, genealogies, responsibilities, and relationships. These are not vague mythological archetypes, they are people. or beings that function like people. They eat and drink. They argue and fall in love. They make mistakes. They grow old, though much more slowly than humans. They require technology. Flying machines called Muse or Shem, weapons that sound like energy beams, communication devices, landing platforms. Spaceports, the texts describe their arrival. 450,000 years ago, according to Sumerian chronology, the Anunnaki came to Earth. They landed first in the marshes of southern Iraq. They established a base called Eridu, the first city, the home in the far away. From there, they expanded. They built more cities, organized labor, began mining operations, searching for gold. Why gold? The tablets say the Anunnaki needed it for their own world, to repair the atmosphere of Nibiru. This has led to speculation about gold's unique properties. It is highly conductive, reflective, resistant to corrosion. In modern aerospace engineering, gold is used in thermal shielding and radiation protection. If an advanced civilization needed to protect a failing atmosphere or reflect solar radiation, gold would be a logical choice. But mining is hard work. The tablets describe the Anunnaki laboring for thousands of years, digging in the heat, carrying ore, growing exhausted and resentful. And eventually they rebelled. The workers refused to continue. They demanded relief. The situation reached a crisis. Enki, the chief scientist, proposed a solution: create a primitive worker. Take an existing creature already on Earth, Homo erectus or a similar hominid, modify it genetically, make it capable of understanding commands, strong enough to work, intelligent enough to follow instructions, but not so advanced that it would challenge the Anunnaki. The Atrahasis epic describes this process in disturbing detail. It is not instantaneous. It is trial and error, multiple attempts, failed prototypes, beings that cannot reproduce, beings with defects, beings that die too quickly. Finally, success, the creation of Adamu and Tiamat, the first human, made in the image and likeness of the Anunnaki but lesser, mortal, bound to the earth. Modern genetics tells a strange parallel story. 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared. Not gradually, suddenly. The fossil record shows Homo erectus for millions of years. And then, in what amounts to an evolutionary blink, fully modern humans, bigger brains, smaller faces, sophisticated tool use. Language, art, symbolic thought. There is no clear transitional form, no missing link. Just the sudden appearance of a species that seems too advanced. And genetic studies show something even stranger. All modern humans trace back to a single woman, mitochondrial Eve, living in Africa around 200,000 years ago, and to a single man, Y chromosome Adam, living around the same time, a genetic bottleneck, as if humanity began not from a gradual population but from a small group, or a designed prototype. The genetics do not prove the Sumerian story. But they do not disprove it either. They show that something unusual happened, something that gave rise to modern humans in a way that does not fit the slow, gradual model of evolution. The tablets say the Anunnaki taught humanity agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, law, medicine, metallurgy, the arts of civilization. And when Nibiru moved away, when the orbit took the planet back into the dark reaches of the solar system, some of the Anunnaki departed, but others remained. They ruled as kings and priests. They interbred with humans. They established dynasties, and they promised to return when Nibiru came close again. That is the story the tablets tell, not in fragments, not in vague allegories, but in detailed, consistent narratives spread across thousands of texts from multiple cities and centuries. The Sumerians believed this. They wrote it as history. They preserved it with care. They passed it down through Babylonian and Assyrian scribes who continued copying the texts long after Sumerian itself had become a dead language. Were they recording truth? Or the most elaborate mythology ever created? Mainstream scholarship says mythology, but the question lingers because the Sumerians knew things. They knew the Earth was round, they knew it orbited the sun, they knew about planets that would not be discovered again for 4,000 years. They had a mathematical system so advanced we still use it. Where did that knowledge come from? Trial and error over centuries. Careful observation passed down through oral tradition, or was it taught? Given to them by someone who already knew, someone who came from a world where such knowledge was already ancient. The tablets sit in museums, the British Museum, the Louvre, the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, the Iraq Museum, tens of thousands of them, most still untranslated. Most still waiting to be read. And among them, scattered across libraries that burned and cities that fell, the same story, the same names, the same cycle. Nibiru returns every 3,600 years. The Anunnaki descend when it draws near. The world changes, and humanity, whether we remember or not, begins again. The wind carries dust across the ruins of Babylon, across the mounds where and Uruk and Nippur once stood. And beneath that dust, pressed into clay by hands that have been gone for 5 millennia, the warning waits. Not whether the gods will return, but when, and what they left behind to prepare us for that return. As running out, hands that wanted us to remember. Hands that hoped we would be ready when the planet of the sea, the number 3,600, appears everywhere in Sumerian records. Not as a symbolic flourish, not as poetic exaggeration, but as a fundamental unit woven into their understanding of time, space, and the movements of the heavens. It is the heartbeat of their cosmology, the rhythm by which they measured the ages of the world. To understand why this number mattered, we must first understand how the Sumerians counted. They did not use base 10 like we do. 10 fingers, 10 digits, a decimal system built on the biology of human hands. The Sumerians used base 60, sexagesimal, a system so mathematically elegant that we never abandoned it. Every time you glance at a clock, you are using Sumerian mathematics. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. Every time you measure an angle, you are following their method. 360 degrees in a circle. Every time you navigate by latitude and longitude, you are dividing the world the way they did. 60 divisions north and south. 60 divisions east and west from any given point. Why 60? Because it is the smallest number divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You can split 60 in half, in thirds, in quarters, in fifths, in sixths. This makes it extraordinarily practical for trade where merchants need to divide goods evenly, for construction where builders need to calculate proportions, for astronomy where observers need to divide the sky into sections that subdivide cleanly. The Sumerians understood this 5,000 years ago. They built an entire civilization on base 60, and they extended it into cosmic time. 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 60 hours would have been impractical for daily life, but 60 times 60 was perfect for measuring the heavens. 60 times 60 equals 3,600, the Shar, the great year, the measure of divine time. In the Sumerian king list, the pre-flood rulers reign not for human lifetimes but for shars, multiple shars. Ululim, the first king, reigned for 8 shars, 28,800 years. Alalgar reigned for 10 shars, 36,000 years. Enmenluana reigned for 12 shars, 43,200 years. Scholars have debated for over a century what these numbers mean. Some argue they are symbolic, representing the authority of kingship stretching back into mythic time. Others suggest they are corrupted, mistranslated, that the original numbers were smaller and scribal errors inflated them over centuries of copying. But the numbers are too consistent, too deliberately constructed, too mathematically precise to be accidents. The simplest explanation is that the Sumerians were not measuring human reigns. They were measuring astronomical cycles. Periods of time marked by the return of something in the sky. Something that completed one full orbit every 3,600 years. Something that governed the transition from one age to the next. If a planet exists with an orbital period of 3,600 years, what would that orbit look like? Astronomers use Kepler's laws of planetary motion to answer this question. The laws are simple. The farther a planet is from the Sun, the longer it takes to complete one orbit. The shape of the orbit determines how close the planet comes and how far it travels. An orbit of 3,600 years is vast. To calculate the average distance, astronomers use the relationship between orbital period and semi-major axis. The formula shows that a body taking 3,600 years to orbit the Sun would have an average distance of approximately 235 astronomical units. 1 astronomical unit is the distance from the Earth to the Sun. 235 astronomical units places Nibiru far beyond Neptune, beyond Pluto, beyond the Kuiper Belt where known dwarf planets orbit, but that is the average distance. Orbits are not circles, they are ellipses, and a highly elliptical orbit means the planet spends most of its time far from the Sun and only a brief period close. If Nibiru's closest approach, its perihelion, brought it into the inner solar system between Mars and Jupiter as the Sumerian texts suggest, then its farthest point, its aphelion, would be over 400 astronomical units away. At that distance, the planet would be invisible, too far to reflect enough sunlight for even the most powerful telescopes to detect. Too cold to emit significant infrared radiation. It would be a ghost, a dark world drifting through the void, detectable only by its gravitational influence on other objects, and only visible during the brief decades when it passed through the warmer inner regions of the solar system. This matches exactly what the Sumerian texts describe. A planet that vanishes, that dwells in the deep, that returns blazing and visible when it crosses the heavens. A planet of the crossing, Nibiru. The orbital mechanics are plausible. Highly elliptical orbits exist throughout the solar system. Comets follow them. Some asteroids follow them. Even some exoplanets discovered around other stars follow them. There is no physical law preventing a planet-sized body from occupying such an orbit. The question is not whether it could exist. The question is whether it does. If such a planet existed and passed through the inner solar system, it would leave evidence. Not just in ancient texts but in the geological and archaeological record. Gravitational disturbances, increased meteor activity as the planet's passage through the asteroid belt disturbed debris, climate changes triggered by shifts in Earth's orbit or axial tilt, catastrophes timed to 3,600-year intervals. And when we look, we find exactly that. Not perfectly, not without ambiguity, but the pattern is there, faint, suggestive. Consistent enough to make the question worth asking. 1,600 years before the Common Era, 3,600 years ago from the present day, the Bronze Age world collapsed, not gradually, suddenly, Within a span of 50 years, nearly every major civilization around the Mediterranean fell. The Hittite Empire vanished. Mycenaean Greece burned. The Kassite dynasty in Babylon ended. Ugarit was destroyed. Troy fell. Egypt, though it survived, was thrown into chaos. The Sea Peoples, mysterious raiders whose origins remain unknown, swept through the region, leaving destruction in their wake. Geological records from this period show the eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded history. The eruption was so massive it triggered tsunamis across the eastern Mediterranean. Ash blackened the skies, crops failed, famine spread. Some scholars link this event to the biblical plagues of Egypt. The darkness, the death, the exodus. Was Thera's eruption random? Or was it triggered by gravitational stress as a massive planetary body passed through the inner solar system? We do not know, but the timing aligns with the Sumerian count. 1600 years before the Common Era, one Shar after the previous return. Go back another 3,600 years, to 5,200 years before the Common Era. The Ubaid culture, a pre-Sumerian farming society, was thriving in Mesopotamia. They built simple villages, made pottery, practiced irrigation, and then around 5,000 years before the Common Era, something changed. The Ubaid culture transitioned, or was replaced, by the Sumerians, who appeared not gradually but suddenly, with writing, with cities, with advanced knowledge. As if someone arrived and accelerated their development. Go back another 3,600 years, to 8,800 years before the Common Era. The Younger Dryas, a 1,000-year return to Ice Age conditions, ended, not gradually, abruptly. Within a decade, global temperatures rose, the ice sheets melted, sea levels surged, and across the world in multiple unconnected regions agriculture appeared, the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica, as if humanity, having survived a catastrophe, was suddenly given the tools to rebuild. Go back one more cycle. 3,600 years before that, to 12,400 years before the Common Era. The Younger Dryas began, temperatures plunged, glaciers advanced, and something struck the Earth. Evidence discovered in the early 2000s suggests a comet impact or airburst. Black mats of charred material, nanodiamonds formed under extreme heat and pressure, shocked quartz, magnetic spherules, a layer of debris consistent with extraterrestrial impact spread across North America and parts of Europe. The impact, if it occurred, would have ignited wildfires across entire continents. The soot and ash would have blocked sunlight, temperatures would have dropped, the climate would have collapsed. And the megafauna, the great mammals that had dominated the Ice Age world, went extinct. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, gone within centuries. 4 moments, 4 catastrophic transitions, each separated by approximately 3,600 years, each marked by sudden climate change, geological upheaval, or civilizational collapse. Each followed by renewal, by humanity rebuilding, by knowledge reappearing. The intervals are not exact. Geological dating has margins of error. The 3,600-year cycle may vary slightly due to gravitational interactions with other planets, but the pattern is there, visible, suggestive, a rhythm written into the bones of history. The Sumerian king list encodes this rhythm. After the flood swept over, when kingship was lowered from heaven again, the phrase implies cyclical return. Not a single flood, not a single catastrophe, but a repeating event, a cycle that the Sumerians recognized because they had survived it, or because their ancestors had survived it and passed down the memory. The flood itself is not myth. Geological evidence confirms that at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose 120 meters. Coastlines where humans lived for thousands of years vanished beneath the waves. River valleys flooded. Entire landscapes drowned. And because humans, like all species, prefer to live near water, the majority of human population centers would have been along coasts and rivers. Those settlements are now underwater, buried under sediment on continental shelves, waiting to be found. Marine archaeologists have begun discovering them, submerged structures off the coast of India, off Japan, in the Mediterranean, off Cuba, each one raising the same question. How advanced were the people who built these? And what happened to them when the waters rose? The Sumerian account suggests an answer. The flood was not random. It was triggered by the gravitational pull of Nibiru passing close to Earth. The texts describe the Anunnaki debating whether to warn humanity. Enlil, the commander, wanted to let the flood destroy the human population, which had grown too numerous. Enki, the scientist, secretly warned one man, Ziusudra in the Sumerian version, Utnapishtim in the Akkadian, Noah in the Hebrew, build a boat, seal it with pitch. Take your family, take animals, survive the deluge, and when the waters recede, begin again. The story is older than the Bible, older than any religious text we possess, and it is not unique to Mesopotamia. Over 200 cultures around the world preserve flood myths, all describing the same event. Water covering the earth, a few survivors, a new beginning. The Sumerians believed the flood was caused by Nibiru, by its gravitational influence on Earth's oceans and ice caps. Modern geology confirms that rapid sea level rise occurred. The mechanism might be debated, but the event itself is not in question. The world flooded, coastlines drowned, and when the crisis passed, civilization began, almost immediately, as if those who survived carried knowledge they used to rebuild. If Nibiru exists, if it follows a 3,600-year orbit, when will it return? Sitchin calculated that the last close passage occurred around 1,600 years before the Common Era. Add 3,600 to that date. The result is 2,000 of the Common Era. The year 2000, the turn of the millennium, some interpreted this as prophecy. The Mayan calendar ended in 2012. Nostradamus was said to have predicted upheaval. Apocalyptic fears spread across the internet. Books and documentaries warned of Nibiru's imminent return. And then the dates passed. Nothing happened. The world continued. The prophecy, it seemed, was false, but orbital mechanics are not that precise. The 3,600-year period is an average. Gravitational interactions with Jupiter and Saturn could speed or slow the orbit by decades or even centuries. If the last passage was 1,600 years before the Common Era, the next passage could occur anytime between 2000 and 2100 of the Common Era. A window. Not a date, we are in that window now. And if the pattern holds, the return would be marked not by sudden apocalypse but by increasing instability. Climate anomalies, seismic activity, increased volcanic eruptions, gravitational stress building as the planet approaches. Signs that could be dismissed as natural variation or recognized as the early tremors of something larger. Modern astronomy has not found Nibiru, but it has found something. In 2016, astronomers at the California Institute of Technology announced evidence of a massive planet at the edge of the solar system. They called it Planet 9, not Nibiru, not on a 3,600-year orbit, but a planet 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth orbiting at 400 to 800 astronomical units. taking 10,000 to 20,000 years to complete one orbit. The evidence is indirect. No one has seen Planet 9, but several distant Kuiper Belt objects orbit in the same direction with similar tilts. The probability of this happening by chance is less than 1%. The simplest explanation is an unseen planet pulling them into alignment through gravity. Planet 9 is not Nibiru. The orbit is too long, the distance too great, but the principle is the same. Large planets can hide in the outer solar system, undetected by telescopes, visible only through their gravitational effects. And if Planet 9 exists, if astronomers are correct that a massive hidden world shapes the outer solar system from the dark, then the Sumerian claim becomes less absurd. If one hidden planet exists, why not two? Why not a world on a different orbit, a more elliptical path, one that brings it closer to the sun during its brief perihelion? One that matches the 3,600-year cycle recorded in the oldest texts humanity ever wrote. We do not have the answer, not yet, but the question is no longer dismissed as fringe. The search for hidden planets is mainstream science now. Telescopes scan the sky. Surveys map distant objects. Supercomputers run simulations. And every year, the outer solar system reveals itself to be stranger and more complex than we thought. The Sumerians measured time in shars, in cycles of 3,600 years. They believed the heavens moved in rhythm, that the gods returned when the cycle completed. That humanity was caught in a pattern of destruction and renewal governed by forces beyond our control. Whether Nibiru is real or symbolic, the pattern they described is undeniable. The Earth has been destroyed before, life has been reset, and the survivors every time rebuilt from fragments, carrying knowledge, passing it down, encoding it in mathematics and myth and monuments aligned to the stars. The number 3,600 is not random, it is not symbolic, it is a calculation. A measurement? A warning pressed into clay by people who believed the cycle would return, who wanted us to be ready, who hoped we would remember. The wind moves through the ruins where the tablets were found, where scribes pressed reed into wet clay and counted the years in shars, where priests watched the sky and waited for the planet of the crossing. And in that wind carried across 5,000 years, the warning remains. The cycle is not broken, the rhythm continues, and whether we believe it or not, the mathematics does not change. 3,600 years, one shar, one great year, one turning of the cosmic wheel, and the wheel is always turning. Rossing returns again. The gods in most mythologies are distant, untouchable. Abstract forces that govern storms and harvests and the movements of the sun. They do not walk among mortals, they do not eat or sleep or argue or fall in love. They exist in a realm beyond human experience. Perfect, eternal, unknowable, but the Anunnaki are not like that. In the Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki have names. Genealogies, job titles, responsibilities. They have family, siblings, children, rivalries, love affairs, political conflicts. They grow tired, they complain about work, they make mistakes, they regret decisions, they age though far more slowly than humans. They are not abstract cosmic forces, they are people, or something very much like people, with all the complexity and imperfection that implies. Anu is the king, the ruler of Nibiru, the father of the gods. He is distant, authoritative. He does not often descend to earth, he governs from above. His sons Enlil and Enki manage operations on the ground, and from the very beginning the two brothers do not agree. Enlil is the commander, the military leader, the one who enforces order and discipline. He is rigid, uncompromising. He sees humanity as a creation that has outlived its usefulness, a tool that became too complicated, too independent, too numerous. when humans multiply and spread and begin making noise, Enlil grows angry. He proposes solutions: disease, famine, and eventually the flood, a complete reset, a purge. Enki is the scientist, the engineer, the one who solves problems through knowledge and innovation. He is curious, compassionate. He sees humanity not as a tool, but as a creation worth preserving. When the Anunnaki grow tired of mining, Enki designs the solution: the genetic modification of an existing hominid, the creation of Homo sapiens. And when Enlil decides to destroy humanity in the flood, Enki defies him. Secretly, he warns one man, teaches him to build a boat, ensures the survival of the species he helped create. This is not theology. This is character development. These are individuals with motivations and flaws and agendas. The texts describe them arguing, Enlil discovering Enki's betrayal, Enki defending his decision. The two brothers standing on opposite sides of the most fundamental question: should humanity survive? Enki wins, barely. Humanity survives, but the relationship between gods and humans changes. The Anunnaki will no longer rule directly. They will step back, teach, guide, but allow humans to govern themselves. Kingship is lowered from heaven, not divine beings sitting on thrones, but humans taught to rule in the name of the gods, intermediaries, priests. Kings who trace their bloodlines back to the Anunnaki but are mortal nonetheless. Among the Anunnaki, one name appears more often than almost any other: Inanna, called Ishtar in Akkadian texts, Aphrodite in Greek, Venus in Latin. She is complex, contradictory, goddess of love and war, beauty and violence, fertility and destruction. She is ambitious, impulsive, demanding. She travels between heaven and earth in a flying craft. She commands weapons that shoot beams of light. She descends to the underworld and returns. She takes mortal lovers and then watches them die. The texts describe her in language that sounds less like mythology and more like biography. She argues with her father. She competes with her siblings. She demands a city of her own, Uruk, where she rules and builds temples and demands tribute. She falls in love with a mortal king, Gilgamesh. He rejects her. She flies into a rage. She unleashes the bull of heaven to destroy his city. Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu kill the bull. Inanna demands punishment. Enkidu dies. Gilgamesh, devastated, begins a quest for immortality. This is not abstract divine symbolism. This is a story with stakes, with consequences, with emotions. The Anunnaki function as characters in a historical drama, not gods in the modern religious sense, but powerful beings with advanced technology and long lifespans interacting with early humans who perceive them as divine. The tablets describe their technology in frustratingly vague terms, not because the Sumerians were hiding information, but because they lacked the vocabulary to describe what they were seeing. They used the words they had. A flying machine becomes a sky chamber. A mu, a shem, a weapon that shoots light becomes the brilliance that burns. A communication device becomes the me, the divine decrees that carry information across distances. One text describes Inanna preparing to fly from Uruk to Eridu. She dresses in her pilot's garments. 7 divine decrees, 7 me. Scholars interpret these as symbolic attributes of divinity, but the text is procedural. She puts on each me one by one, as if donning equipment: a helmet, a breastplate, a device on her wrist, a communicator, flight instruments, and then she boards her sky chamber and flies. When she arrives in Eridu, Enki greets her. They drink beer. Enki becomes drunk and gifts her additional me: knowledge, technology, the secrets of kingship and warfare and craftsmanship. Inanna loads them onto her craft and flies back to Uruk. When Enki sobers, he realizes his mistake. He sends servants to stop her, to retrieve the me, but she has already flown beyond reach. This is not how myths normally work. Gods do not get drunk and make mistakes, but the Anunnaki do, because they are not gods in the sense we understand. They are individuals, fallible, human-like in their behaviors even if they are not human in origin. The Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest complete narratives we have, describes the creation of humanity in procedural detail. The Anunnaki have been laboring for thousands of years, digging, hauling, mining. The work is hard. The heat unbearable. The younger gods, the Ijigi, grow resentful. They burn their tools. They march on the assembly of the elder gods. They demand relief. The gods convene, a council, a debate. Enlil is furious. He views the rebellion as insubordination. He proposes punishment, but Anu the king recognizes the problem is real. The work is too difficult. The Ijigi are exhausted. A solution is needed. Enki proposes one: let us create a worker. A primitive being capable of labor but not rebellion. We will take the clay of the earth. We will mix it with the essence of a slain god. We will fashion a creature in our image but lesser, strong enough to work, intelligent enough to follow commands, but mortal, bound to the earth. The text describes the process. Ninma, the medical officer, works with Enki. They take an existing creature, a hominid already present on Earth, Homo erectus or a similar species. They extract its essence, its clay, and they mix it with something else. The blood of Wila, a lesser god who is sacrificed for the purpose. His temu, his spirit, his genetic material. The first attempts fail. Beings are created but they are flawed, unable to reproduce, unable to hold urine, unable to speak clearly. The text does not gloss over this, it catalogs the failures. Enki assigns each flawed being a role based on its limitations. A servant who needs no bladder control, a musician who does not need clear speech. The process continues until success, until a viable prototype emerges. 7 males, 7 females. Created through the wombs of birth goddesses who serve as surrogates. The beings can reproduce, can work, can understand language. They are called Adamo, the first humans, and they are set to labor in the mines and fields, replacing the Anunnaki workers who return to easier tasks. For over a century, scholars have read this as creation mythology, a poetic explanation of human origins, the clay representing the earth, the blood of the god representing the divine spark. The trial and error representing the struggle to understand existence. Symbolic, metaphorical, not literal, but the language is procedural. It describes steps, ingredients, outcomes. It reads less like poetry and more like a technical report written by someone trying to explain a process they witnessed but did not fully understand. And when we compare it to modern genetics, the parallels are unsettling. 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared, not gradually. Suddenly, the fossil record shows Homo erectus, a stable species that existed for nearly 2 million years with minimal change. And then in what amounts to an evolutionary blink, Homo sapiens. Larger brains, smaller jaws, reduced body hair, sophisticated tool use. Language, symbolic thought, art, burial of the dead. There is no clear transitional form, no species that bridges the gap cleanly. The missing link remains missing, and geneticists have found something even stranger. All modern humans trace their mitochondrial DNA, inherited through the maternal line, back to a single woman. Mitochondrial Eve, living in Africa around 200,000 years ago. And all modern human males trace their Y chromosome back to a single man. Y chromosome Adam, living around the same time, a genetic bottleneck. As if humanity did not emerge from a large, diverse population but from a small founding group. or a designed prototype. The genetics do not prove the Sumerian account, but they do not disprove it either. They show that something unusual happened, something that does not fit the gradual model of evolution. The Anunnaki texts say humanity was designed, created through genetic modification. Enki and Ninmah taking an existing hominid and mixing it with their own genetic material, creating a hybrid, a being that carries both terrestrial and extraterrestrial DNA, made in the image and likeness of the Anunnaki but mortal, capable of reproduction but with a limited lifespan. The Bible preserves a fragment of this story. Genesis describes God creating man from the dust of the earth and breathing life into him, creating woman from man's rib. But an older layer of the text survives. Genesis 6. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives from among them. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, the heroes of old, men of renown, the sons of God, the Nephilim, the heroes of old. Who were they? Christian theology interprets them as fallen angels, demons who corrupted humanity, but the older Sumerian texts are more specific. The Anunnaki intermarried with humans. Their offspring were demigods, half divine, half mortal, stronger and longer lived than ordinary humans but not immortal like their Anunnaki parents. These were the kings, the heroes, the founders of dynasties. The Sumerian king list claims that early rulers lived for extraordinary lengths, hundreds of years. Even after the flood, when the cosmic time of the pre-flood kings ended, the post-flood kings still reigned for centuries. Etana of Kish, 1400 years. Meski-Agashur of Uruk, 325 years. These are not as extreme as the pre-flood figures, but they are still far beyond normal human lifespans. Were these exaggerations, legendary figures inflated by time and myth, or were they hybrids, beings with Anunnaki ancestry who inherited longer lifespans? The tablets make no distinction. They list these kings as historical figures. They describe their reigns, their accomplishments, their deaths as if they were real people. The Book of Enoch, a Jewish text not included in most Bibles but preserved in Ethiopian Christianity, describes the Watchers, angels who descended to earth, who taught humanity forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, astronomy, medicine, warfare, cosmetics, sorcery, and who took human wives and fathered the Nephilim, giants, beings of great strength and violence. God, angered by this corruption, sends the flood to cleanse the earth, to destroy the Nephilim, to reset humanity. Only Noah and his family survive, and the Watchers are bound, imprisoned beneath the earth until the day of judgment. This is the Hebrew version of the Sumerian story. Enlil decides to destroy humanity. Enki warns Ziusudra. The flood comes, the hybrids are wiped out. Humanity begins again. The details differ, the theology differs, but the narrative structure is identical, and both trace back to Mesopotamia, to the tablets, to the oldest written accounts. Across the world, the same pattern appears. In Hindu texts, the Devas descend from the heavens. They teach humanity. They intermarry with humans. Their offspring are the rishis, the sages who possess divine knowledge. In Greek mythology, the Titans ruled before the Olympian gods. They taught humanity. They mated with mortals. Their children were heroes, demigods, Perseus, Heracles, Achilles, half divine, half human. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, descends from the sky. He teaches the people agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, the calendar. He is tall, bearded, fair-skinned. Unlike the native population, he promises to return. And when the Spanish arrive, some mistake them for the returning gods. a tragic misidentification, but based on memory, on stories passed down for millennia. In Egypt, the Nibiru, the gods who came from the stars, ruled before the pharaohs. They established the principles of order and justice. They built the first temples. They taught the people to write and measure and calculate. The pharaohs who followed claimed descent from them. Divine blood flowing through mortal veins. In every tradition, the pattern repeats. Beings from the sky, teachers, intermarriage with humans, hybrid offspring, departure with a promise to return. The names differ, the details differ, but the structure is identical, as if every culture is remembering the same event, adapted to local language and theology, but preserving the core truth. Were the Anunnaki real? Were they extraterrestrial visitors from Nibiru? Or were they something else? An advanced human civilization destroyed by catastrophe. Survivors who seemed god-like to the less developed populations they encountered after the disaster. Memories distorted over millennia until history became mythology. We do not know, but the texts are consistent, too consistent to dismiss as coincidence, too detailed to be pure invention. The Sumerians described the Anunnaki not as distant abstract forces but as specific individuals with technology and knowledge and lifespans far exceeding human norms. They described a civilization that came from elsewhere, that modified humanity, that ruled for thousands of years, and that departed when their planet moved away, promising to return when the orbit completed. The texts say the last departure occurred after the flood, around 10,000 years ago, when Nibiru moved back into the outer solar system. When the Anunnaki, or most of them, left Earth, they did not vanish completely. A few remained, ruling as kings, teaching as priests, gradually withdrawing as humanity learned to govern itself. But they left behind knowledge, structures, bloodlines, and a promise that when Nibiru returns, when the 3,600-year cycle completes, they will return, not as conquerors, not as destroyers, but as teachers, as the founders returning to see what their creation has become, to judge whether humanity has preserved the knowledge they left behind, or forgotten it. The wind moves through the ruins of Eridu, the first city, the home in the far away, where the tablets say the Anunnaki first landed, where Enki established his house, where humanity was created in the image of gods who were not gods but travelers from a world that crosses the heavens. And in the silence, pressed into clay by scribes who believed every word, the message remains. The Anunnaki came, they taught, they departed, and they will return when the cycle completes. When Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, blazes once more in the sky. When the time of the gods begins again, whether we believe it or not, the Sumerians did. They wrote it as history, preserved it for 5,000 years, and left it for us to find. The question is not whether the story is true. The question is what they left behind to prove it. For thousands of years, the outer solar system was a mystery. Beyond Saturn, where the ancients could see with naked eyes, there was only darkness, empty space, the edge of the known universe. No one imagined that worlds might exist beyond that boundary. Worlds so distant that sunlight barely reaches them. So cold that methane freezes solid, so far that their orbits take not years but centuries to complete. And then in 1781, a musician-turned-astronomer named William Herschel pointed his telescope at what he thought was a faint star. He watched it for weeks, and realized it was moving, not like a star, like a planet, a world no one had ever seen before. He named it Uranus. The first planet discovered in recorded history, the seventh world orbiting the sun. The discovery shattered the ancient model. The solar system was larger than anyone had imagined. And if one hidden planet existed, why not more? Astronomers began searching, watching for perturbations in Uranus's orbit. Tiny wobbles caused by the gravitational pull of something beyond. In 1846, they found it. Neptune, the eighth planet, even farther, even colder, invisible without a telescope. A world of frozen winds and storms that have raged for centuries. And still the perturbations continued. Something else was out there, tugging at Neptune, pulling it slightly off course. In 1930, after decades of searching, astronomer Clyde Tombaugh discovered a ninth world, Pluto, tiny, distant. Locked in a strange dance with Neptune, its orbit tilted and elliptical, more like a comet than a planet. For 76 years, Pluto was considered the ninth planet, the edge of the solar system, the final world. But the outer solar system refused to stay empty. In the 1990s, astronomers began discovering more objects beyond Neptune. Hundreds of them, then thousands, a belt of icy worlds and debris called the Kuiper Belt. Dwarf planets, Eris, Makemake, Haumea, each one challenging the definition of what a planet is. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union demoted Pluto. It was no longer a planet, it was a dwarf planet, one of many. The solar system officially had 8 planets again. But the debate was not over, because the outer regions were revealing themselves to be far stranger and more populated than anyone had expected. And some of those distant objects were behaving oddly. In 2003, astronomers discovered an object called Sedna, a dwarf planet with one of the most extreme orbits ever observed. Its closest approach to the Sun, its perihelion, is 76 astronomical units, farther than Pluto, but its aphelion, its farthest point, is over 900 astronomical units. It takes 11,400 years to complete one orbit. Nothing in the known solar system could explain Sedna's orbit. It was too distant to have been scattered by Neptune, too stable to be a captured comet. Something else had shaped its path, something massive, something far beyond the known planets. In 2012, astronomers found another strange object, 2012 VP-113. Its orbit was even more detached than Sedna's, perihelion at 80 astronomical units, aphelion estimated at over 400, another orphan. Another world whose orbit made no sense unless something unseen had pulled it into place. Then more, 2013 FT28, 2015 KG163, 2015 RR245, a growing list of distant objects all sharing a curious property. Their orbits were aligned, not randomly scattered, but clustered, as if something was herding them, organizing them, pulling them into similar paths. In January 2016, 2 astronomers at the California Institute of Technology, Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown, published a paper that would reignite one of astronomy's oldest questions, the search for hidden planets. They analyzed the orbits of 6 of the most distant objects in the Kuiper Belt, and they found a pattern that should not exist. All 6 objects had orbits tilted in the same direction. All 6 reached their perihelion in roughly the same region of space. The probability of this happening by chance, they calculated, was 0.007%, less than 1 in 1,000. The simplest explanation was an unseen planet, a world massive enough to gravitationally shepherd these distant objects into alignment. They called it Planet 9. The calculations suggested a world 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting at an average distance of 400 to 800 astronomical units, taking 10,000 to 20,000 years to complete one orbit. It would be a super-Earth, larger than our world but smaller than Neptune, and it would be nearly invisible. too far to reflect much sunlight, too cold to emit significant infrared radiation. Hidden in the vastness of space, the announcement sent shockwaves through the astronomical community, not because the idea was radical, but because the evidence was compelling. Battigan and Brown were serious scientists. Mike Brown had discovered Eris, the dwarf planet whose existence led to Pluto's demotion. He knew the outer solar system, and he was convinced Planet 9 existed. Other astronomers began reanalyzing the data. Some found additional supporting evidence. In 2017, a team from the University of Arizona identified 19 more distant objects whose orbits showed similar clustering. The pattern was real, and it was growing stronger. In 2018, researchers ran supercomputer simulations. They modeled the outer solar system with and without a ninth planet. The simulations with Planet 9 matched the observed orbits. The simulations without it did not. The gravitational signature of an unseen world fit the data better than any alternative explanation. In 2019, astronomers proposed new methods for finding Planet 9. Infrared surveys, searches for reflected light during the planet's closest approach to the Sun. Analysis of cometary orbits that might have been perturbed by the planet's gravity. The search intensified. Telescopes around the world began scanning the predicted region of sky. NASA issued a statement. While the existence of Planet 9 remains unconfirmed, the evidence continues to grow. And the search continues. Planet 9 is not Nibiru. Its orbit is too long, 10 to 20,000 years instead of 3,600. Its distance too great. It does not pass through the inner solar system. It remains in the frozen outer darkness, but the principle is the same. Large planets can hide even in our own solar system, even with all our telescopes and technology. The outer solar system is vast, and we have barely begun to explore it. If Planet 9 exists, and most astronomers now believe it does, then the Sumerian claim becomes less absurd. If one massive hidden planet exists at the edge of the solar system, why not two? Why not a world on a different orbit, a more elliptical path, one that brings it closer during perihelion, one that matches the 3,600-year cycle? The objections to Nibiru have always been the same. We would have seen it. Its gravity would disturb the orbits of known planets. There is no evidence, but Planet 9 has shown that large worlds can remain unseen, that gravitational disturbances can be subtle, that the outer solar system holds secrets we are only beginning to uncover. Astronomers have mapped less than 5% of the sky at the depth required to detect a Neptune-sized object at 300 astronomical units. The searches have focused on the regions where planets are expected based on standard solar system formation models. But a captured rogue planet or a world on a highly elliptical orbit would not follow those rules. It could be anywhere. And if its orbit takes it far above or below the plane of the ecliptic where most planets orbit, it could have avoided detection simply by being in a region no one was searching. The WISE mission, NASA's Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, scanned the entire sky between 2009 and 2011. It found thousands of new asteroids and comets, but it did not find Planet 9 or Nibiru. Skeptics pointed to this as proof. If a large planet existed, WISE would have seen it. But WISE's sensitivity had limits. It could detect Jupiter-sized objects out to about 26,000 astronomical units. Neptune-sized objects out to about 700 astronomical units. But a super-Earth at 400 to 800 astronomical units, The predicted location of Planet 9 would be at the edge of WISE's detection capability. And if it was farther or smaller or in a region of sky with dense star fields that masked its faint signal, it could have been missed. The Vera Rubin Observatory, scheduled to begin full operations in the mid-2020s, will survey the entire southern sky repeatedly. Its sensitivity and wide field of view will allow it to detect objects WISE missed. If Planet 9 exists, Vera Rubin will likely find it. And if something else lurks in the outer darkness, it will find that too. Could Nibiru exist and remain hidden? The answer depends on its orbit and size. If it is a super-Earth like Planet 9, and if its perihelion keeps it beyond 100 astronomical units, it could remain undetected until advanced surveys map the outer solar system completely. But if its perihelion brings it into the inner solar system, between Mars and Jupiter as the Sumerian texts describe, the situation changes. A planet passing that close would cause measurable gravitational disturbances. The orbits of Mars, Earth, and Jupiter would show perturbations. Their positions would deviate from predicted paths. Astronomers have been tracking planetary positions with extreme precision for over a century, and they have found no such disturbances. This is the strongest argument against Nibiru. If it passed through the inner solar system every 3,600 years, we would see evidence in the orbital dynamics of known planets. The fact that we do not suggests either Nibiru does not exist, or its orbit does not bring it as close as the Sumerians claimed, or its last passage was so long ago that any disturbances have dissipated. But there is another possibility, one that reconciles the ancient texts with modern observations. What if the 3,600-year cycle is not the orbital period of a single planet? What if it represents something else? A resonance pattern, a clustering of comet impacts, a cycle of increased meteor activity triggered by the solar system passing through debris fields as it orbits the galaxy. Or gravitational perturbations from a distant binary companion to the Sun, a brown dwarf or dim red dwarf star orbiting at thousands of astronomical units, too faint to see, but massive enough to disturb the Oort cloud periodically, sending showers of comets toward the inner solar system. Some astronomers have proposed that the Sun has a distant companion. They call it Nemesis, a dim star orbiting so far that we have never detected it. Every 26 million years, Nemesis passes through the Oort cloud. Its gravity disturbs trillions of comets. Some fall inward, toward the Sun, toward Earth. Mass extinction events occur. The fossil record shows periodic extinctions roughly every 26 million years. The pattern is there. The mechanism remains theoretical. If Nemesis exists on a 26 million year cycle, could another body exist on a 3,600-year cycle? Not a planet, but a brown dwarf, a failed star, massive enough to generate heat through gravitational compression but not massive enough to ignite fusion. Dim, nearly invisible, orbiting in the frozen darkness beyond the Kuiper belt, returning periodically. Disturbing comets and asteroids, triggering impacts, climate changes, catastrophes. This is speculative. But it fits both the ancient accounts and modern observations. The Sumerians may not have seen a planet, they may have seen a dim red object, glowing faintly, visible only when it drew near, and they called it Nibiru, the crossing, because it crossed the sky, because it marked transitions. Because when it appeared, the world changed. Whether Nibiru is a planet, a brown dwarf, or something else entirely, the search continues. Astronomers scan the sky. Space missions probe the outer solar system. Every year the map grows more complete. And every year we discover objects we did not expect. Worlds in strange orbits, moons around distant dwarf planets, rings and atmospheres in places that should be barren. The solar system is not the neat, orderly place we imagined. It is chaotic, complex, full of surprises, and if the last few decades have taught us anything, it is that we should not assume we have found everything. The outer darkness is vast, and it keeps its secrets well. In 2021, astronomers discovered a comet with an orbit that suggested it originated outside the solar system. An interstellar visitor, passing through, never to return. If rogue comets from other star systems can enter our solar system, why not rogue planets? Worlds ejected from distant systems, drifting through interstellar space, captured by the sun's gravity into long elliptical orbits. Rogue planets are common. Observations suggest there may be billions of them in the galaxy. Worlds without stars, wandering in the dark. If one passed close to our solar system, it could be captured, pulled into orbit. And if that happened millions of years ago, the planet would still be orbiting, invisible, unknown, waiting to be discovered. This is the context in which the Nibiru question must be asked, not in isolation, not as ancient myth versus modern science, but as part of a larger question. How much do we really know about our own solar system? How many worlds remain hidden? How many cycles govern the movements of objects so distant we have never seen them? The Sumerians claimed they knew. They claimed they were told by beings who came from a world that crosses the heavens, who understood the solar system completely. Who mapped it? Who predicted the return? And who left behind the knowledge in the hope that humanity would remember? Modern science cannot confirm the Sumerian account, but it can no longer dismiss it as impossible. The discovery of Planet 9 has opened the door. The realization that large worlds can hide has changed the conversation. The question is no longer whether hidden planets could exist. The question is how many, and whether any of them are on a path that brings them close. The search for Planet 9 continues. Telescopes scan, simulations run, data accumulates, and if astronomers find it, if they finally see the massive world that has been shaping the outer solar system from the shadows, it will mark a turning point, not just in astronomy, but in our understanding of what the ancients might have known. Because if one hidden planet exists where the math predicts it should, then the principle is proven. Large worlds can orbit unseen. And the possibility, however remote, that another world orbits on a different path, a path the Sumerians described 5,000 years ago, moves from myth to hypothesis. The wind moves through the deserts where the tablets were found, where scribes pressed into clay the names of gods who came from the planet of the crossing, where astronomers in ancient ziggurats watched the sky and counted the years in shars, where the cycle was recorded not as belief but as knowledge. And in the cold darkness beyond Neptune, beyond Pluto, beyond the Kuiper belt, something may be waiting, too distant to see, too patient to hurry, moving in the slow rhythm of cosmic time, 3,600 years to complete one orbit, one shar, one great year, one return. The mathematics does not lie. The orbits do not change, and whether we call it Planet 9 or Nibiru or something else entirely, the search has only just begun. The outer solar system is revealing its secrets, slowly, one discovery at a time. And the Sumerians, 5,000 years dead, wait to be proven right. If the Anunnaki left Earth thousands of years ago, if they departed when Nibiru moved back into the outer darkness, what remains? What proof could survive 10,000 years of erosion and conquest and forgetting? What evidence would be strong enough to outlast empires and ice ages and the slow grinding weight of time? The answer the Sumerians believed was knowledge, not just any knowledge, but knowledge that should not exist. Knowledge so advanced, so precise, so inexplicable that it forces a question. Where did it come from? How did people without telescopes map the solar system? How did civilizations without satellites align monuments to celestial coordinates? How did Bronze Age cultures perform mathematics that would not be rediscovered for thousands of years? The standard explanation is human ingenuity. Careful observation across generations, trial and error, slow accumulation of understanding, and that works for most things, for pottery, for agriculture. For the gradual refinement of tools and techniques, but it does not work for everything, because some things appear too suddenly, too completely, with no developmental stages, as if they were taught rather than discovered. The Sumerians appeared around 3,500 years before the Common Era, not gradually. Not as an extension of earlier cultures, but as a civilization already formed, already literate, already sophisticated. Archaeologists call this the Sumerian problem, the sudden emergence of complexity where there should be centuries of fumbling experimentation. They had writing, not pictographs, not simple symbols representing objects, but cuneiform, a system capable of expressing abstract ideas, legal concepts, poetry, philosophy, mathematics. From the very first tablets, the script is functional, already evolved, as if someone sat down and designed it rather than letting it develop organically over generations. They had mathematics based on the number 60, sexagesimal, a system we still use today without understanding why. 60 is not intuitive. Human hands have 10 fingers. Base 10 makes biological sense, but 60 makes mathematical sense. It is divisible by more factors than any smaller number, perfect for trade, for construction, for astronomy. The Sumerians knew this 5,000 years ago, and they built their entire civilization on it. They had astronomy that tracked planets invisible to the naked eye. The tablets describe the solar system as containing 12 bodies: the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. And then 3 more: Uranus, Neptune, and Nibiru. They should not have known about Uranus and Neptune. Those planets were not discovered again until the 18th and 19th centuries with telescopes, after centuries of astronomical observation. How did the Sumerians know? The standard answer is they did not. That scholars misinterpret the texts, that the 12 bodies include the sun and moon and only the 5 visible planets. That Nibiru is symbolic, a crossing point, not a planet, but the texts are specific. They list the bodies in order from the sun, they describe their characteristics, their colors, their movements, and they include worlds that should be invisible, as if someone who had seen the full solar system told them what was there, and they wrote it down, preserved it. Even though they could not verify it themselves. They had legal codes, not primitive tribal customs, but sophisticated jurisprudence. The Code of Ur-Nammu dated to around 2,100 years before the Common Era is the oldest known written law code, but it is not crude. It distinguishes between intentional and accidental harm. It establishes different penalties based on social status. It includes provisions for property rights, inheritance, debt, and divorce. These are the kind of laws that emerge after centuries of case law, after generations of disputes revealing gaps in existing systems, but they appear fully formed in the earliest texts. They had medicine, prescriptions, surgical procedures, pharmacological knowledge. A tablet from Nippur dated to around 2,000 years before the Common Era lists remedies for various ailments. Thyme for infections, willow bark for pain, fermented grain for digestion, modern pharmacology has confirmed that these treatments work. The compounds in these plants have biological activity. But how did the Sumerians know? How did they identify which plants helped which conditions without the scientific method, without controlled trials, without biochemistry? The standard answer is observation. People noticed that chewing willow bark reduced pain. That time helped wounds heal. Over generations, this knowledge accumulated, and that is plausible, but the Sumerian medical texts are not collections of folk remedies. They are systematic, organized, with dosages, preparation methods. Contraindications, as if compiled by someone who already understood the principles, who taught rather than discovered. This pattern repeats across every domain. Sophisticated knowledge appearing suddenly, with no clear developmental path. And when we look at other ancient civilizations, the same thing happens. Not everywhere, not always, but at specific moments, at transition points, when old worlds end and new ones begin. Egypt emerges around 3,000 years before the Common Era, the Old Kingdom, the age of pyramid building, and from the very beginning they possess knowledge that should take centuries to develop. They know the earth is round, they know how to calculate pi, they know how to survey land with precision. They know how to align structures to the cardinal directions within fractions of a degree. The Great Pyramid at Giza demonstrates this knowledge in stone, 2,300,000 blocks, each weighing 2 to 15 tons, some weighing as much as 80 tons, quarried, transported, lifted. Placed with such precision that the gaps between stones are thinner than a credit card. No mortar, just stone against stone. Fitted so tightly that even today, 5,000 years later, you cannot slide a knife blade between them. The base is level to within 2 centimeters across a perimeter of over 900 meters. The sides align to the cardinal directions with an error of less than 1/15 of a degree. The structure encodes mathematical constants, pi, the golden ratio. The relationship between the pyramid's height and base approximates the relationship between a circle's radius and circumference. This was supposedly accidental, byproduct of the pyramid's shape. But the precision suggests intention. The Egyptians did not claim to have invented this knowledge. In their own texts, they refer to Zep Tepi, the first time, an age when the gods walked the earth, when Osiris ruled, when Thoth taught writing and mathematics, when the principles of order were established. Everything that came after, they said, was restoration, rebuilding, maintaining the balance set during the first time. This is the same language the Sumerians used: restoration, not invention, preservation of what was given, knowledge passed down from a time before, from those who came before the flood. Before the catastrophe, before the world ended and began again. In the Indus Valley, around 2,500 years before the Common Era, cities appear that rival anything in Mesopotamia or Egypt. Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, urban centers with populations in the tens of thousands. Grid layouts, standardized brick sizes, sophisticated drainage systems, public baths, granaries, multi-story building. The level of planning is extraordinary. Streets run in straight lines, buildings aligned to compass directions. The drainage system is so advanced that wastewater from homes flows into covered channels beneath the streets. This is urban engineering, not trial and error village building. And it appears suddenly, fully functional. As if designed by someone who already understood hydrology and public health. The Indus script remains undeciphered. We do not know what they wrote or what they believed, but the cities themselves speak. They speak of knowledge, of organization. of understanding that normally takes centuries to develop. And then, around 1800 years before the Common Era, the civilization vanished. The cities were abandoned, the writing stopped. For over 1,000 years, the region returned to scattered villages, and when urban civilization re-emerged, it was different, smaller, less sophisticated, as if the knowledge had been lost. In China, around 2,000 years before the Common Era, the Shang dynasty emerges, already literate, already using bronze, already practicing divination with oracle bones inscribed with the earliest forms of Chinese characters. The writing is not primitive, it is complex, capable of expressing abstract concepts, and it appears without clear precursors, as if literacy arrived suddenly rather than evolving slowly. In Mesoamerica, around 1,200 years before the Common Era, the Olmec civilization appears. They build massive stone heads, some weighing over 20 tons, carved from basalt, transported from quarries over 80 kilometers away. They develop a calendar, they practice astronomy, they align their monuments to celestial events, and they do it in isolation, with no contact with the old world. No diffusion of ideas from Mesopotamia or Egypt, and yet the knowledge is similar. The obsession with celestial cycles, the alignment of structures, the mathematical sophistication. How, if knowledge develops independently in each region, why does it always appear the same way? Suddenly, completely, at moments of transition. Why do civilizations separated by oceans and millennia share the same obsession with astronomy? The same need to encode knowledge in monuments? The same stories of teachers who came from elsewhere and gave the gifts of civilization? The standard answer is human nature. All cultures look at the sky. All cultures develop calendars. All cultures build monuments. The similarities are convergent evolution, parallel development, not evidence of contact, not evidence of a common source. But the details are too specific. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes 25,920 years to complete, appears encoded in myths and monuments across unrelated cultures. The Egyptians referenced it in the alignment of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. The Maya referenced it in their long count calendar. The Hindus referenced it in their yuga cycles. The Greeks discovered it through careful observation and called it the Great Year. Precession is not obvious. It takes centuries of continuous observation to detect. You need records accurate enough to compare star positions across generations. And yet multiple ancient cultures supposedly isolated from one another knew about it. How Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, 11,600 years old, older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than any city, massive stone pillars arranged in circles, each pillar carved with animals, foxes, snakes, scorpions, vultures, boars, lions. The carvings are sophisticated, detailed, not crude stick figures but realistic depictions showing movement and anatomy. The site required organization, hundreds of workers, years of labor, quarrying, transporting, carving, erecting stones that weigh 10 to 20 tons. Who organized this? Who led it? Who designed it? Hunter-gatherers, according to archaeology. People who lived in temporary camps, who followed herds, who gathered wild plants. People who should not have the social complexity to coordinate projects on this scale. And then, around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the site was buried, deliberately, carefully, covered with dirt and rubble, as if someone wanted to preserve it or hide it, as if they knew something was coming. And the only way to protect the site was to bury it completely. Why build something monumental and then bury it? Why go to the effort of covering thousands of tons of carved stone? The site served a purpose, and when that purpose ended or when danger approached, it was sealed, preserved for a future generation, for people who would dig and find and wonder. In Egypt, the Sphinx shows signs of water erosion, deep vertical fissures carved into the limestone walls of the enclosure. Geologist Robert Schoch examined the erosion patterns and concluded they were caused by heavy rainfall. Not wind, not sand, rain, the kind of sustained precipitation that has not occurred on the Giza Plateau for at least 7,000 years. The region has been arid since the end of the African humid period. If the erosion was caused by rain, the Sphinx must be older than conventional Egyptology claims. Much older, carved during a wetter climate, before 5,000 years before the Common Era, possibly before 7,000 years before the Common Era, which would make it older than the pyramids by thousands of years, older than the dynastic period, older than hieroglyphics, built by people who existed before Egypt as we know it. The Egyptian historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century before the Common Era, claimed that the gods ruled Egypt for thousands of years before the first human pharaohs. He listed their names, their reign lengths. Historians dismissed this as mythology, divine kingship propaganda. But what if he was preserving actual records? Records that described a time when Egypt was ruled by others, by those who came before. In Peru at Puma Punku near Tiwanaku, stone blocks show machine-like precision. Perfectly flat surfaces, right angles accurate to within fractions of a degree. H-shaped grooves cut with such uniformity they look like industrial manufacturing. The stone is andesite, one of the hardest stones on Earth. Carving it requires tools harder than the stone itself. Bronze will not work. Iron barely scratches it. The ancient people of the region had neither. They had copper and stone tools, yet the blocks are carved with precision that rivals modern machining. How? The standard answer is patience. Grinding, pounding, rubbing softer stones against the andesite for years until the desired shape emerged. But the surfaces are too flat, the angles too precise, and some of the blocks weigh over 100 tons. Moving them, positioning them, fitting them together, this is engineering, advanced engineering, beyond what Bronze Age tools should accomplish. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, massive polygonal blocks fit together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Each stone has multiple irregular faces. Each face matches perfectly with the adjacent stone. No two stones are the same shape. Each one is custom-fitted. The precision is extraordinary, and the stones weigh between 50 and 150 tons, some even larger. How do you move a stone that weighs 150 tons? Modern cranes can do it, but they require steel, hydraulics, diesel engines. The Inca, who occupied the site in the 15th century, did not claim to have built it. They said it was there when they arrived, built by the gods or by giants, by those who came before. At Baalbek in Lebanon, 3 stones called the trilithon each weigh approximately 800 tons. They sit in the foundation of a Roman temple complex, but the Romans did not quarry them. They built on top of an older foundation. A foundation made of stones so large that no known ancient technology can explain their movement. And in the quarry nearby, an even larger stone remains. The stone of the pregnant woman, weighing approximately 1,000 tons, partially cut but never moved. Why would anyone attempt to quarry a stone that weighs 1,000 tons if they did not have the technology to move it? Unless the technology existed, unless the knowledge existed and was lost, leaving behind stones that defy explanation. These structures share common features: massive stones, precise alignments, astronomical orientation, techniques beyond known capabilities, and no clear developmental stages. They do not represent the pinnacle of a long tradition. They represent the beginning. The first examples, already sophisticated, already functional, as if the knowledge appeared suddenly, taught, given, preserved from an earlier time. The Anunnaki, the Sumerians said, taught humanity the arts of civilization: agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, law, architecture, metallurgy. When they departed, they left behind knowledge, encoded in monuments, passed down through priesthoods, preserved in texts and traditions, waiting for humanity to understand. And across the world, at sites separated by oceans and millennia, the same knowledge appears, the same precision, the same obsession with the sky, the same effort to build structures that will outlast everything else. Structures that say, we were here, we knew, and we wanted you to remember. The wind moves through Göbekli Tepe, through the Sphinx enclosure, through the ruins of Puma Punku and Sacsayhuaman and Baalbek, and in the stones carved and shaped and placed with impossible precision, the message remains. Knowledge was given, knowledge was preserved, and knowledge waits, in monuments too large to move, in alignments too precise to be accidental, in techniques too advanced to be primitive, in structures built not for the living but for the future, for the people who would come after. For us, the Anunnaki left, but they did not leave empty-handed. They left evidence, not in words that can be mistranslated, not in myths that can be dismissed, but in stone, in mathematics, in knowledge that should not exist, in proof that forces the question: where did it come from? Who taught them? And what else waits to be found? If Nibiru returns, if the 3,600-year cycle completes, what happens? Not in mythology, not in prophecy, but in physics, in geology, in the measurable consequences of a massive planetary body passing through the inner solar system. What does the warning actually warn us about? The Sumerian tablets do not describe the return as peaceful. They describe disruption. The heavens tremble, the earth shakes, waters rise, mountains fall. The gods descend in fire, cities burn, humanity is tested, and only those who remember the teachings survive. This is the language of catastrophe, not spiritual metaphor, physical destruction. And if we strip away the religious framing, if we read the texts as eyewitness accounts translated into the only vocabulary available, a pattern emerges. The return of Nibiru brings gravitational stress, seismic activity, volcanic eruptions, climate disruption, floods, the kind of planetary-scale disaster that ends civilizations and forces survivors to start over. Can a planet cause this? Can a world passing millions of kilometers away trigger earthquakes and eruptions and floods? The answer depends on mass and distance, and the math is unforgiving. Gravity decreases with the square of distance. Double the distance and gravity drops to 1/4. But even at great distances, the gravitational influence of a massive body can be significant. The moon, far smaller than Earth, causes tides, pulls the oceans, bulges the crust. It creates stress that some geologists believe correlates with increased seismic activity during perigee, when the moon is closest. If a planet 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth passed within a few astronomical units, its gravitational pull would dwarf the moon's influence. Tidal forces would stress Earth's crust. Magma would shift beneath tectonic plates. Fault lines under tension would snap. Volcanoes primed to erupt would trigger. The stress would not cause every earthquake or eruption, but it would increase the likelihood, tipping systems already near critical points into catastrophic release. The Sumerian texts describe exactly this: the earth groaning, mountains smoking, the ground splitting, fire pouring from the depth, not as divine punishment, as consequence. As the natural result of gravitational forces acting on a geologically active planet. The asteroid belt offers another danger. The region between Mars and Jupiter contains millions of rocky fragments, debris left over from the solar system's formation. Or perhaps, as some researchers suggest, the shattered remains of a planet destroyed in a cosmic collision. Most asteroids orbit in stable paths, but gravitational perturbations can change that. A massive planet passing nearby would disturb their orbits, send some tumbling toward the inner solar system, toward Earth. Meteor impacts increase, not a single massive strike, but a bombardment. Hundreds or thousands of smaller objects, some burning up in the atmosphere, some striking the ground. Some large enough to cause regional destruction. The sky would glow with meteors, fireballs streaking overhead, impacts igniting wildfires, dust filling the atmosphere, blocking sunlight, cooling the climate. This matches geological evidence from the Younger Dryas impact. Around 12,800 years ago, something struck Earth. Not a single asteroid, but fragments. A comet broken apart by tidal forces or a previous collision. The fragments hit across North America and possibly other continents. The impacts ignited wildfires. The soot and ash cooled the climate. The Younger Dryas cold period began, and it lasted for over 1,000 years. If the Younger Dryas impact coincides with a Nibiru passage, the mechanism becomes clear. Nibiru's gravity disturbed the Oort cloud or the Kuiper belt, sent comets inward. One of them broke apart, the fragments struck Earth, catastrophe followed. And humanity, just beginning to recover from the last ice age, was thrown back into glacial conditions, forced to adapt or die. The tablets describe this. They describe fire from the sky, stones falling, the world burning, then cold, then flood as the ice melted again. A sequence that matches the geological record exactly. But the most immediate danger is not cosmic, it is terrestrial. The supervolcanoes. Beneath Yellowstone National Park in the United States, beneath Lake Toba in Indonesia, beneath the Phlegrean Fields in Italy, magma chambers the size of small countries' weight. These are not ordinary volcanoes. They do not erupt in the conventional sense. They explode, they collapse. They release energy equivalent to thousands of nuclear weapons. The last Yellowstone supereruption occurred 640,000 years ago. It covered half of North America in ash, meters deep. The eruption column reached the stratosphere. Sulfur and ash circled the globe. Sunlight dimmed, temperatures dropped. For years, photosynthesis struggled, plants died, herbivores starved, the ecosystem collapsed. We are overdue. Yellowstone erupts roughly every 600,000 to 800,000 years. The current magma chamber is active, restless. Seismic activity increases, ground level rises and falls. Geysers change their behavior. The system is primed, waiting for a trigger. Gravitational stress from a passing planet could provide that trigger. The tidal forces would squeeze the magma chamber, increase pressure, crack the crust above. And if the crust gave way, if the magma found a path to the surface, the eruption would not be local, it would be global. Ash would blanket continents. The atmosphere would darken. Temperatures would plummet. Crops would fail worldwide. Billions would starve. This is not speculation. This is geology. Supervolcanoes exist. They erupt. They have caused mass extinctions before. The Toba eruption 74,000 years ago reduced the human population to perhaps 10,000 individuals. We nearly went extinct. Genetic studies confirm a bottleneck, a moment when humanity was reduced to a handful of survivors clinging to life in scattered refuges. If Nibiru's passage triggers another super eruption, the consequences would be catastrophic. Modern civilization depends on agriculture, on supply chains, on global trade. A single year of failed harvests would cause famine in regions that cannot produce enough food locally. 2 years would collapse governments. 3 years would reduce the population by billions. The survivors would not be those with the most technology. They would be those with the most basic skills: how to grow food without industrial agriculture, how to purify water without treatment plants, how to preserve food without refrigeration, how to build shelter, how to heal without modern medicine. The skills humanity had before civilization, the skills most of us have forgot. This is what the Sumerian warning addresses, not the end of the world. The end of the world as we know it, the collapse of complexity, the return to simplicity, the moment when everything we depend on fails, and those who survive are those who remember, who carry knowledge, who can rebuild. The tablets describe the Anunnaki teaching survivors after the flood, showing them how to plant, how to measure, how to organize, not because humanity had never done these things, but because the catastrophe had killed those who knew. The knowledge needed to be given again, taught again, restored. If Nibiru returns, if the cycle completes, the pattern repeats. Catastrophe, collapse, survival of the few, and then rebuilding, with whatever knowledge we manage to preserve. The question is not whether we will survive. Humanity is resilient. We survived ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, meteor impacts, plagues. We are hard to kill completely, but we are easy to set back, easy to reduce, easy to erase the accumulated knowledge of millennia in a single generation of chaos. What would we lose? Everything stored digitally, gone within years. Hard drives fail without power. Servers corrode without maintenance. The internet is not a cloud, it is physical infrastructure requiring constant energy and repair. If the grid goes down globally, if it stays down, the digital age ends, and with it most of modern knowledge. Books survive longer, but not much longer. Paper decays, especially in humid climates. Within centuries, most books would be pulp, libraries would rot. The printed word would fade. What remains are monuments. Stone, metal, things too large to destroy, things built to outlast everything. This is why the ancients built in stone, why they aligned monuments to stars, why they encoded knowledge in geometry and proportion, because they knew civilizations fall. They knew writing is fragile. They knew the only way to preserve knowledge across catastrophes is to carve it into the earth itself. If we are wise, we will do the same. We will create archives that do not require electricity. Stone tablets, metal engravings, instructions simple enough that survivors without advanced education can understand. How to purify water, how to grow food, how to make tools, how to treat disease, the basics, the knowledge that keeps people alive. Some have already begun. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway stores seeds from crops around the world, buried in permafrost, protected from war and disaster. If agriculture collapses, if plant varieties go extinct, the seeds remain, ready to be planted, ready to restart. The GitHub Arctic Code Vault stores digital code on film reels designed to last 1,000 years, buried in a mine in Svalbard, preserving software, programming languages, the accumulated knowledge of the digital age in a format that survives electromagnetic pulses. Solar flares, the collapse of the internet. The Long Now Foundation is building a clock designed to run for 10,000 years, mechanical, powered by temperature changes, ticking once per year, chiming once per century. A monument to long-term thinking, a reminder that time extends beyond human lifespans, beyond civilizations, that we should plan not for decades but for millennia. These efforts are small, symbolic, but they acknowledge the truth that what we build can be destroyed, that what we know can be forgotten. That the only way to survive catastrophe is to prepare for it, to assume it will happen, to plan for the moment when everything fails. The Sumerians did this. They carved their knowledge into clay. They built ziggurats aligned to stars. They passed down oral traditions through priesthoods trained to memorize and recite. They understood that knowledge must be preserved in multiple forms, in multiple places, so that when one archive burns, another survives, and they left a warning. Not just that catastrophe comes, but that it comes in cycles, that the return of Nibiru is not random, not unpredictable, but rhythmic, measurable, written in the movements of the heavens. 3,600 years, one shar, one great turning, one moment when the world ends and begins again. If the cycle is real, if the math is correct, we are in the window. Somewhere between 2000 and 2100 of the Common Era. The next passage, the next return, not guaranteed, not cert, but possible, plausible, worth considering. And if it comes, if the signs appear, increased seismic activity, volcanic eruptions, meteor showers, climate anomalies, will we recognize them? Will we connect the pattern? Or will we dismiss each event as isolated, as natural variation? As unrelated coincidences? The ancients watched the sky, they tracked the planets. They knew when something was coming because they had records, they had continuity, they had institutional memory spanning centuries. We have lost that. We think in election cycles, in quarterly profits, in academic grants that last a few years. We have no institutions designed to think in terms of millennia, no archives maintained across generations, no long-term planning beyond the immediate future. This is the vulnerability, not that catastrophe will come, but that we will not be ready, that we will not see the warning signs, that we will not preserve what matters, that when the collapse comes we will lose everything, and the survivors will start over, not from knowledge, but from ignorance. Forced to rediscover what we once knew, forced to rebuild from fragments. Unless we learn, unless we remember, unless we take the warning seriously, not as prophecy, not as myth, but as testimony, the testimony of those who survived the last cycle, who rebuilt from ruins, who passed down the memory, who carved into stone the one message they believed we needed to hear. This has happened before, it will happen again. Preserve the knowledge, build in stone, align to the stars, teach the next generation, because when the world ends, knowledge is all that survives, and those who carry it become the teachers of the new age. The wind moves through Yellowstone, through the caldera where magma waits, through the geysers that mark the pressure building beneath. And in the silence, in the restless earth, the question remains. Not whether the cycle will complete, but whether we will be ready when it does. The Sumerians left their answer carved in clay. They built their monuments. They encoded their warnings. They passed down the knowledge. And they hoped that when the time came, when Nibiru returned, humanity would remember. The tablets sit in museums, the monuments stand in deserts, the warnings remain, written in stone, written in mathematics, written in the oldest testimony humanity ever recorded, and the clock is ticking, 3,600 years, one shar, one cycle, one warning. The question is whether we will listen. The desert wind passes over the ruins of Ur before dawn. The air is still, cool. The stars fade into the gray light of morning, and beneath the sand, beneath the collapsed walls and forgotten temples, the clay tablets wait, 5,000 years they have waited. 5,000 years since hands pressed reed into wet clay and recorded what they believed was the most important truth humanity could know. That the heavens move in cycles, that the gods return, that the world ends and begins again. Not once, not randomly, but in rhythm, in pattern. In a dance so vast that human lifetimes cannot perceive it. But stone remembers, clay remembers, mathematics remembers, and the message, patient as the stars themselves, endures. What if they were right? What if the Sumerians, looking at the sky with eyes no different from ours, understood something we have forgotten, not through primitive superstition, not through myth-making, but through knowledge, knowledge given, knowledge preserved, knowledge passed down from those who came before the flood. Before the catastrophe, before the world ended the last time, the question is not whether Nibiru exists. The question is deeper, older, more fundamental. It asks whether we believe our ancestors were capable of truth, whether we trust that their obsession with the sky was not ignorance but insight, whether we are willing to consider that the oldest written words humanity ever produced were not stories but warnings. We have spent 2 centuries translating their tablets, decoding their mathematics, mapping their cities, studying their monuments, and with every discovery the picture grows stranger, more sophisticated, more inexplicable. The Sumerians knew things they should not know, built things they should not be able to build, described things they should never have seen. And they did not claim credit. They did not say we invented this, we discovered this, we achieved this. They said it was given, taught, restored from what was before before the flood, before the ice melted, before the coastlines drowned, before the world of the younger Dryas ended in fire and ice, before humanity was reduced to scattered survivors carrying fragments of knowledge they no longer fully understood. The geological record confirms the catastrophe. The flood myths confirm the memory. The genetic bottleneck confirms the near extinction, and the sudden appearance of agriculture and civilization afterward confirms that something changed, that humanity did not slowly climb from ignorance to knowledge, that we leaped, as if taught, as if guided, as if someone who remembered helped those who had forgotten. The Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Nibiru, the Devas, the Sky Teachers, every culture has a name for them. Every tradition remembers beings who came from elsewhere and brought the gifts of civilization. Different languages, different theologies, but the same structure, the same function, the same promise, that they would return when the cycle completed. And now in the 21st century, we search the sky for hidden planets. We map the outer solar system. We discover worlds we never knew existed. We find patterns that suggest massive objects shaping the darkness from beyond our sight, and the possibility once dismissed as fantasy becomes hypothesis, becomes science, becomes a question worth asking. Could Nibiru exist? Could a world orbit unseen? Could the 3,600-year cycle be real? We do not know, not yet, but we know this. Large planets can hide, elliptical orbits exist, gravitational influences extend across vast distances, and the solar system is stranger and more complex than we ever imagined. The pattern is there, written in catastrophe, 12,800 years ago, 8,800 years ago, 5,200 years ago. 1,600 years ago, moments of transition, moments when the world ended and began again, moments separated by intervals that echo the Sumerian count. 3,600 years, one shar, one great turning, whether Nibiru is planet or symbol. Whether the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials or survivors of an earlier human civilization, whether the cycle is cosmic or terrestrial, the truth beneath the myth remains. The world has ended before. It will end again, not because the universe is cruel, but because that is the nature of systems, of planets, of climates, of the forces that shape existence. Stars explode, asteroids collide, volcanoes erupt, ice ages come and go, magnetic poles reverse, civilizations rise and fall. These are not punishments, they are patterns, natural rhythms playing out across scales so vast that human minds struggle to comprehend them. But some have always understood. The astronomers who watched the sky for generations, the priests who maintained records across centuries, the scribes who copied tablets knowing the knowledge mattered even if they no longer understood why. They knew time was longer than empires. That memory must outlast stone. That the only way to survive the turning of the wheel is to remember that the wheel turns. We forget this. We believe we are immune. We build cities on fault lines and coastlines. We depend on systems so complex that the failure of one part cascades through the whole. We store our knowledge in formats that require electricity and maintenance. We plan in decades when we should plan in millennia. And when the collapse comes, when the systems fail, when the complexity unravels, the survivors will be those who remember, not how to program computers or fly airplanes, but how to grow food, purify water, make tools, heal wounds, the skills that kept humanity alive for hundreds of thousands of years before civilization. The skills encoded in monuments and myths and warnings carved into stone. The Sumerians understood this. They built in stone. They aligned to stars. They encoded knowledge in geometry that would survive when writing faded and languages died. They did not build for themselves. They built for us, for the people who would come after. For the generation that would live in the next age and need to know what came before. That is the gift, not answers, not certainty, but memory, the knowledge that we have been here before, that we have built great things and lost them, that we have survived catastrophe and rebuilt from fragments, that we are part of a story longer and stranger than anything we were taught. And if we are wise, we will leave the same gift for those who come after us. We will preserve what matters, not in clouds that require servers, not in books that decay, but in stone, in metal, in knowledge so simple and fundamental that it can be passed down through oral tradition when writing is lost. How to survive, how to rebuild, how to remember, because the world will end. Perhaps not today, perhaps not in our lifetimes. But eventually, the forces are too great, the cycles too inevitable, the history too consistent. And when it does, when the lights go out and the systems fail and the complexity collapses, the survivors will need something to hold on to. They will need to know they are not the first. That others have stood where they stand. That humanity has faced extinction before and survived. That the world has ended and begun again. That memory, even when everything else is lost, endures. The wind moves across Göbekli Tepe, across the pyramids at Giza, across Stonehenge and Machu Picchu and Angkor Wat, across every place where the ancients left their mark, across every monument aligned to stars, across every stone too large to move, across every warning carved too deep to erase. And in the silence, in the alignment of stones with constellations that have shifted, in the mathematics that still function after 5 millennia, the message waits. This has happened before. It will happen again. Preserve the knowledge, build in stone, align to the stars, teach the next generation. Because when the world ends, knowledge is all that survives. The Sumerians called it restoration, not invention, restoration, the recovery of what was before, not the creation of something new. And if that is true, if we are restoring rather than inventing, if the knowledge we rediscover was known before and lost and is now being found again, then everything changes. We are not moving forward into an unknown future. We are moving in circles, returning to knowledge that was always there. Waiting to be remembered, waiting for the moment when humanity is ready to hear what the ancients tried to tell us. That we are not alone in time, that we are connected across ages, that the teachers who came before left instructions, that the cycle is not broken, that the wheel still turns. And that when Nibiru returns, when the planet of the crossing blazes once more in the sky, those who remember will recognize the signs. Not as doom, not as ending, but as transition, as the completion of one age and the beginning of another. As the moment when the old world gives way to the new, when those who carried the knowledge become the teachers of the next cycle. This is what the tablets say. This is what the monuments encode. This is what 5,000 years of warnings have tried to preserve. Not fear, not panic, but readiness. The understanding that change comes, that catastrophe is part of the pattern, that survival depends not on fighting the cycle but on flowing with it, on remembering, on carrying forward. We return now to where we began, to the present moment. Wherever you are listening, whatever hour you are keeping, the past whispers through fragments of clay and stone, through myths we dismissed and ruins we are only beginning to understand, through tablets pressed by hands that have been dust for 50 centuries, through monuments aligned to stars that have shifted but still shine. But we are here, present, alive, still asking questions, still wondering what came before and what lessons might be waiting in the ruins. Still looking at the sky and asking whether we are alone. Whether the cycle will return, whether the warnings were real, that capacity to wonder, to seek, to remember what was forgotten, that is what makes us human. That is what connects us across millennia to the people who carved the first stones and aligned the first temples and told the first stories about gods who came from the stars. If this journey through deep time has resonated with you, if these questions pull at something inside you that refuses to accept the simple answers, take a moment. Press the like button. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring these mysteries that sleep between history and myth, between prophecy and science, between what we were taught and what the evidence suggests. Your support helps keep these stories alive, helps ensure that the questions continue to be asked, that the memory continues to be passed down, that the warnings carved 5,000 years ago by people who believed we needed to hear them are not forgotten. And perhaps that is the real message hidden in the ancient stones. Not just what happened, not just that the world ended before, not just that Nibiru may return, but that someone cared enough to write it down, to carve it into monuments that would outlast them, to preserve it, to send it forward through time to us. We do the same now, in our own way, asking questions, seeking evidence, sharing what we find, keeping the memory alive for the next generation. For the people who will come after us and need to know that they are part of a story longer than empires, deeper than written history, older than the oldest monuments still standing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for wondering with me. Thank you for being willing to consider possibilities that challenge everything we thought we knew about where we came from and whether we are truly the first to ask these questions. The Anunnaki, whether they were gods or travelers or survivors or symbols, left behind more than tablets. They left a question that echoes across 5,000 years, a question that each generation must answer for itself. Are we alone, or are we simply waiting? Waiting for those who left to return, waiting for the cycle to complete. Waiting for the moment when the planet of the crossing appears again in the sky and we understand, finally, what the warnings meant. Until the next mystery calls us back into the past, may your present be peaceful. May your questions lead you somewhere meaningful. May you rest knowing that the stars still hold secrets, that the ruins still whisper, that the tablets still wait, patient as stone, for someone willing to listen. The world you know has ended before. The evidence is there, in stone, in myth, in mathematics that still function, in monuments aligned to stars, in stories told across continents by people who never met. And if it has ended before, it will end again, not as failure, not as punishment, but as rhythm, as cycle, as the great turning wheel of time that the Sumerians understood and we are only beginning to remember. When that moment comes, when the next age ends and the new one begins, may we be ready. May we have preserved what matters. May we have built in stone. May we have passed down the knowledge. May we remember. The wind passes over the ruins one last time, over Ur standing silent in the Iraqi dawn, over the tablets pressed into clay 5,000 years ago, over the fingerprints of scribes who believed they were leaving a message that mattered. And memory, patient as stone, eternal as the stars, waits for the next person brave enough to ask, was Nibiru real? Will the Anunnaki return? Is the 3,600-year warning true? The answer depends on whether we trust our ancestors, whether we believe they were capable of truth, whether we are willing to look at the evidence without dismissing it because it challenges what we were taught. The tablets exist. The mathematics functions. The monuments stand. The cycle appears in geology and archaeology. The pattern is there, whether we see it is up to us. The Sumerians left their answer carved in clay. They built their monuments. They encoded their warnings. They passed down the knowledge. And they hoped that when the time came, when the cycle returned, humanity would remember. The question is whether we will. Good night.